Same-sex marriage. Hey, we've often talked about it here on Legal Video Blog, and we're talking about it again today. Why? Because of a case that came out of New Orleans, Louisiana. You may have heard about the case there. A federal district court judge decided whether or not the statute in Louisiana saying that same-sex marriage was illegal was constitutional. The judge considered it, and he said it was constitutional. Well, that decision came after 21 federal court decisions said it was unconstitutional. How can this happen? Well, this goes to the very nature of the civil rights that are preserved in the United States. And they're preserved through the Constitution of the United States and various other state constitutions. Among them, right to free speech, right to marry, right to have children. But how can one judge say, in fact, a ban on same-sex marriage was constitutional and 21 courts saying it was unconstitutional? Well, it goes to how we exist as a nation. And traditionally, there have been a lot of rights that have primarily been decided by the states. The majority of these things that have been decided by the states have been such things as the right to marry, the right to divorce. For years, there was controversy in the federal court system as to whether or not recognition would be given to a divorce by one state to another state. As many people may remember, back in the old days, and we're talking back in the 30s and 40s, Nevada had a very liberal divorce law. A lot of people went to Reno, got residency, got divorces, but were those divorces recognized in all states? No, they weren't. No, they weren't. And it took a long time for that to all get squared away. Well, we're in the process of determining whether or not same-sex marriages are going to be constitutional, or actually unconstitutional, or constitutional. And in order to do that, we have to look at the very, very specific issues that are involved and who gets to decide those issues. Well, historically, it's been the states. And when the judge in New Orleans decided that they were constitutional, when the state decided that it was going to ban same-sex marriages, he said this is something that has traditionally been decided by the states, and the states have a right to consider it. That whole doctrine of states having a right to consider is generally considered as federalism, and we're talking about a new concept in the federal courts that it's referred to as new federalism, but basically, once again, recognizing that the states have rights. And here, the judge in New Orleans said that the state of Louisiana had a right to decide who gets to be married. He also went on and he said, you know, before we rush forward on this and willy-nilly say that it's unconstitutional to have same-sex marriage bans, we need to consider all the ramification, because there's lots of laws out there that are going to be impacted by this. And among the laws that he looked to is he said, you know, basically you can't have an uncle marrying a niece because of the concerns with incest, but if you have a same-sex marriage and there aren't going to be any offspring, maybe an uncle can marry a niece. Is that going to be allowed? Well, we don't know, because we haven't figured any of that out yet. So the question basically is, do the states have the right to make this decision, or is this a decision that's going to be made by the federal courts? And that decision being made by the federal courts will ultimately be made by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has not definitively ruled on this. You probably heard about the decision regarding California Proposition 8 that said same-sex marriages were illegal. That went up to the U.S. Supreme Court. U.S. Supreme Court said in that case that the statute did not pass constitutional muster, and therefore the statute could not be enforced. But the reason the U.S. Supreme Court decided that was on a very narrow issue, and basically it was one of standing, saying the people who brought the case didn't have a right to bring the case. So there hasn't been a definitive decision from the U.S. Supreme Court on the very intrinsic issue of, do people who are of the same sex have a right to marry? Now, we're probably going to get that decision in the next term, which will be from about 2014 through 2015. And when it comes along, you'll be able to see what the U.S. Supreme Court decided to do. Now, the Supreme Court may wait a while before it makes a decision. And part of the reason this sometimes happens, and a court will wait for a while, is to let things work themselves out in the lower court levels, in the various other federal courts and in the state courts, before it makes a decision, because there will be lots of people who have thought about this, given consideration to it, and therefore the U.S. Supreme Court will have lots of guidance. So we'll see when this decision is made, but it will be made by the U.S. Supreme Court at some point in time, and we will see what that decision is. You will now know upon what basis that decision is made. We bring you this case, and we bring you cases every week so you understand how the law works when you see it working. I'm David Allen.